Okay, so our first presenters are self-introduced already. So whenever you're ready to go, please go ahead.
Okay, let me share my screen
Yeah,
first.
you should be able to do that.
All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
All right. So the topic of our presentation today is peer interaction in online vocabulary learning, a sociocultural perspective. We're going to start with the self-introduction first. My name is Haoyue Zhang, and I also go by my English name, Sabrina. I'm currently a master's student at the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education. And my research interests includes language assessment and also sociocultural theories in L2 development. And I'm handing over to my partner.
Yeah, thank you, Haoyue. So, hi everyone, I'm Ruge, and I'm currently a master's student in TESOL at Pennsylvania State University. And my research interests are broadly like into ESL and EFL, classroom teaching and learning, conversation analysis, and social cultural theory in L2 development. Yeah, so our presentation is divided into two parts today. So first, we're going to talk about the research context and research questions and where we situate our study. And in the second part, we're going to talk about specifically our studies framework and methods and procedure extra. So our initial motivation for this study is from an observation that there are a lot of online learning groups in China, in Chinese social media, but many of them haven't been exposed, and we are aware and we agree that in an EFL context, where students are kind of looking for an environment to practice and to actually use English, and also the interaction between teacher and learners in language classroom is still also kind of limited. So we think it's also very important to explore and to see the potential of how learners can interact and possibly develop through online interaction. So of course, it also related to a big social context that's nowadays many teaching and learning are online. So these are our two research questions. First is that does peer interaction mediate advanced EFL learners' vocabulary learning in an online context? And if so, how can peer interaction mediate this group of learners in that online context? So, just to briefly summarize what we know about peer interaction in SLA studies, since the interaction hypothesis in early 1980s, there are a host of studies to discuss and explore the effect of different kinds of interactions, and learner-teacher interaction and peer interaction are indeed different. Researchers have proved that L2 learners can support each other linguistically, while some factors such as degree of collaboration could mediate the effectiveness of peer interaction. And in terms of some empirical L2 vocabulary group learning studies, they have shown the effectiveness of using group metacognitive prompts for incidental vocabulary learning and also group dynamic assessment. And there are studies that examine and cooperative learning models. But in our knowledge, there are fewer studies they explore the peer mediation process, kind of to see what our students actually interact and what they're actually doing when they interact and when they use language to interact with each other in an online setting from a social cultural theory perspective. So we decided to take this challenge. So this is where we are from a social cultural perspective. The cognition and knowledge are inherently social and dialogically constructed. And central to SAT is the concept of the ZPD. So, so the ZPD in the initial Vygotsky's 1978 definition, it's about, I'm not going to read the whole quote, but it's about that a learner can develop with the cooperation with the more capable peers. But there are many studies that have shown that even with some proficiency level, or even with not necessary with a capable authority, there are evidence that shows that learners can benefit from cooperatively dialogical activities and co-constructing language knowledge. So peers can support, yeah. Okay, so we'd like to draw your attention to the combination of our conversation analysis as a methodology using in this study. So just a very brief introduction of conversation analysis. It's a qualitative, empirical, and inductive methodology to unfold people's interaction behaviors, and action sequences and turn design are three core concepts in conversation analysis. So how it related to SAT? There are researchers such as Van Carpeno proposed that as a methodology tool can be used to in the service of pinning down auto-developmental process taking place in interactions that may not always be immediately visible to researchers. So this is how we situate our study. And yeah, I think, yeah, Haoyue will talk about more about the vocabulary knowledge framework.
So the exact learning process we're going to look at is the vocabulary learning. We're very much inspired by Ray Jagotiv's conceptual semantics concept, where he basically argues that vocabulary learning should not be finding and corresponding explanation for a word. Instead, it should be a matter of conceptualization. So to find more details, to define a detailed to operate the conceptualization, we also refer to Nation's vocabulary learning series, where he argues that form, meaning, and usage are three important aspects of learning vocabularies. And also he proposed that for each detailed learning stages, both receptive and productive knowledge are prioritized here. So that really inspired us to put two different tasks in our learning process. One involves receptive knowledge and the other involves productive knowledge. And the exact words we're going to look at are reporting verbs. And this should be very important in the realm of English for academic purpose. And past research have concluded that the non-native English speakers, which are also the EFL learners in our study, usually struggle with using reporting verbs in different senses. So then this is where we try to define the ZPD of our learning process. So for learners that can do without guidance, they should be able to know the basic literal meaning of the words. However, they're not familiar with the usage, especially in the academic settings. And the ideal level, we expect our learners to flexibly and precisely choose the reporting words to make their statements or to quote in a more direct fashions. And in between is the ZPD that we decided to help them learn through the process. And this is also where we argue that peer interaction should be able to play the part of mediation here. Now, back to the concept of conceptualization, after a lot of research, this is how we decided to finally define the learning goals under the nation's theoretic framework. This is three different aspects that's under the learning the meaning of the words stage. To start with the form and meaning part, we expect the learners to know the literal meaning of the words. And then moving on to the next stage, the concept and reference stage, we expect the learners to know the classification of reporting verbs so that they should be able to understand what are the verbs used. Is it to describe the author's act, or is it to help propose the writer's idea? And for the last part, the association part, we expect the learners to really differentiate different tones of the statement. So that involves some neutral tones, some weaker tones, and some stronger tones. And these are the framework that we refer to from a university writing centers research, right? So I'm gonna hand it over to my partner to describe the studies methods.
Yeah, thank you, Haoyue, for nicely describe the framework. And for the methodology, we're quite aware that using CA to analyze online data have some complexity. And so first is the transcription process, right? If it's only written text, then we're losing a lot of turn design features, and we probably cannot completely see the real actions, or we might misunderstood a lot of things. The second one is about cohesion, because the sequences is very important in CA, and their studies find that in online interaction, there might be some sequential irregularity, and there might be not typical initiation, reflective, and responses and feedback sequences. So to kind of cope with this challenge, we will ask the participants to meet via audio call meetings during that interactive process. Yeah, can you go to the next page? Yeah, thank you so much. So first, we select target reporting verbs, just as how you described, from two sources which we believe are reliable, and then we select and adapt authentic reading articles containing the target reporting verbs. And for the peer mediation learning process, we think that these three moves can generally guide the process. First, learners read the reading articles individually, and then they will discuss the topic of the reading as a group and strive to reach agreement. In this case, the discussion prompts will be given. And after the peer mediation, they will write a reflection blog based on the discussion using the target verbs. So both receptive and productive knowledge can be optimized during the process. Yeah, so what for the data set that we analyze, there are basically two of them. One is the audio recordings of the peer mediation sessions. We believe that from analysis of that over time, change. We can see evidence of their learning, and to see first of all is to see how they are actually doing during the interaction, and how we can interpret their learning. And the second one is students writing, because they are not only after their interaction, they're going to write something they're going to write a short essay to using these target verbs. So we think that the writing product can also show their understanding of reporting verbs in a kind of different level of understanding. Yeah, so as we're still processing this research, so we're very grateful that if you could give us any comments and any questions for us, we will carefully think about it. Yeah, I guess that's pretty much of our presentation, and I already see that's the timing. So yeah, I guess so we're going to have questions analysis at the end of the session, right? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Thank you,
Thank you
Hao
so
Yu
much
and Wu
for-
Ge. Thank you for your great
so much.
presentation. Again, we'll have the Q&A at the end of the presentation. Well, let's welcome our second presenter for this session, Sam or Guodong. You can go ahead and share screen if you want.
Sure, thank you so much. Can everybody see my screen? Very good. So good morning or evening. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Sam, and I really appreciate this opportunity to present the results of our team-based research project. Teachers' written feedback strategy and their effectiveness on improvement of ELL writing. A case study of first-year composition courses at Sino-American University. And in this presentation, I will briefly talk about the background and research questions. I include the literature review and some methods. Then I will introduce the results and end with some conclusions and suggestions. At Sino-American University in southern China, where I collect the data, our first-year freshman students are required to take 2 basic college composition courses as part of their requirement. And those 2 courses are referred as CC First and CC Second. Argumentative essay is one of the 4 essays required in course CC Second. It asks students to choose a debatable topic and use the language of recession, concession, and rebuttal. Next, I will introduce some related literature in second language development field. For a period of time, scholars question the utility of feedback. For example, during the 1950s, from a behaviorist perspective, errors were considered more as negative indicators. Also, contrastive analysis asserts that students' first language functions as a source of errors to target language learning. Thus, written corrective feedback was justified under those beliefs, and errors were believed worth correcting. In contrast, Krashen proposed the 3 hypotheses, which seemed to rule out the role of CF and the error correction. Acquisition learning hypothesis, along with monitor hypothesis and the natural order hypothesis. He believes that the students' acquisition orders seems to be dependent on the order of learning. Therefore, if the focus is on the subconscious acquisition of the target language, then error correction is not beneficial to the acquisition process. From a cognitive perspective, written corrective feedback accommodates the views such as intentional learning, explicit instructions, and automatized processing. Lang, in his interaction hypothesis, proposed that the use of conversational strategies, including the comprehension checks and clarification, requires to help learners to resolve communication difficulties. Those processes are also reflected in SLA writing processes, and the corrective feedback should incorporate repetition and confirmation. Also, written corrective feedback is viewed as a controlled processing component of the information processing model, such in the processability and teachability series. So sociocultural learning, as mentioned by the previous presentation, differs from cognitive theories by emphasizing the role of corrective feedback when it is tailored to learners' stage of development, such as the construction of zone of proximal development and activity theory, which sees all human actions as configuration of both social and individual influence within a dynamic system. So in this way, the effectiveness of error correction should be investigated holistically. From a pedagogical perspective, empirical studies into the effectiveness of the types of feedback have failed to produce any clear conclusion up to date. The results of recent studies have been very inconsistent. And this debate has continued for over 10 years on whether giving corrective feedback to second language learners. And among these disputes, there are two noticing figures, and the first is Truscott. Okay, Truscott would claim that all error corrections is unnecessary, ineffective, and even harmful, with little evidence to show that error correction would actually help students to improve the accuracy. Feedback should not be provided at all. Clearly, Darren Ferris would argue from an opposite perspective. Writing feedback is effective, and he claims that the previous research had methodological issues. He stressed that the significance of the types of feedback given on different errors. So this led to several research studies, and neither can confirm the efficiency of CF, and several severely disputed it. In Truscott's theory, I didn't show the slide. In Truscott's theory, written feedback can be categorized as direct methods and indirect methods. So direct methods is actually correcting students' error, and the indirect method is the indication by teachers to the presence of an error by symbols such as underlying, circling, or using error code. As for teachers' marginal comments, text-specific commentary makes it easier for students to locate the sources of a problem. And considering the positive and negative comments, scholars like Wormer and Silver mentioned the potential effect for both positive and negative comments. Research shows that some instructors should not provide too many negative feedback, while other research suggests that praise does not encourage revision and gives students false impression about their writing ability. So in our study, the main research question is, what type of feedback is more effective in improving learners' target linguistic form in argumentative essay? And this is the conceptual framework for feedback analysis. To be specific, this research focuses on the form of teachers' corrective feedback and teachers' comments. Corrective feedback includes error correction. Teachers' comments consists of marginal comments, overall comments, and suggestions for improvement. We elaborate this main research question into general research questions and design our interview questions from both teachers and students' sides. So 5 general questions includes, for teachers, we would like to study the feedback strategy, types of feedback, and evidence of improvement in students' final essays. And for students, we would like to research on their perception of CF and the types of feedback preferred. And this table shows the number of samples, students, and essays analyzed. We collected 8 students' essays with their drafts and interviewed 8 students and 5 instructors. Since the study involved the volunteer participation by students and teachers, only 3 of the 8 cases do not have teacher interview. And in our instruments, our data consists of student essays, drafts with written feedback, and both individual interviews with students and teachers. These instruments are designed after being informed by current literature, and it includes feedback analysis guide, teachers' corrective feedback code, and the teachers' comment code. Now let's take a close look. So look at the methods in details. Teacher corrective feedback are divided into direct feedback, indirect feedback, and as a combination of both. Teachers' comments code are categorized into 5 types. Type 1 is language issues such as grammar and word use. Type 2 is structure and organization. Type 3 is content and genre-based issue. And there are 3 categories there are 3 categories to the depth of comments. So category 1 identifies issues without any suggestions. Category 2 identifies issues but gives suggestions. Type 3 identifies issues and gives suggestions along with explanations. Next is the result part. Question 1 is related to the common feedback strategies. Most writing instructors provide written feedback on at least 1 draft. They often explain their feedback to students orally, either as global comments in the class or conversation with individual writers. They encourage the students to have an oral conference with them if they had any doubts or needs clarifications. As they provided written feedback, all of the instructors give students an opportunity to see them in their office hours and discuss the feedback individually. Question 2 is about the type of feedback. Out of 8 essays that were analyzed, 2 had received only indirect feedback, 3 had received only direct feedback, 2 had received a combination of direct and indirect feedback, and 1 did not receive any feedback at all, only for oral feedback. This indicated that teachers employed different strategies based on their own preference as well as time constraints. Whether direct or indirect, all students appreciated the students' oral explanation of the feedback. Considering the comments given by the instructors, most of the revision work was based on direct correction, including language use, organization, and structure, referring to type 1 and 2. Furthermore, from type 4 and 5, we see there was very little positive and encouraging comments. Considering the depth of comments, most of the comments only indicated the error without suggestion or explanations. It could be one potential causes why students did not make any satisfactory improvement as a result of the next question was stressed. All the students made an attempt at improving their essays. The students made the correction of most grammatic errors and direct feedback, but without actually learning from their mistakes. They only corrected the errors the teachers had pointed out. They failed to identify similar errors elsewhere in their essay and repeated the same errors in their revised work. So even after the teachers gave them a mini lecture in class about how to avoid such errors, the errors kept showing up in their subsequent work. And it was evident from the essay revisions that the students did not make satisfactory improvement based on teachers' indirect feedback. They did not understand the errors or suggestions, make an unsuccessful attempt, or just ignored the feedback altogether. It was only a few instances where the students were able to successfully address the indirect feedback. On students' view of written feedback, most of the students felt that they were not satisfied with the feedback they had received. Only 2 students were satisfied or generally satisfied. One issue is that almost all students voiced that the feedback was insufficient for them. Students think of their teachers as their editors, and once the teachers point out the errors for them, they think that simply carrying out those modifications, they have complete the assignment of revision and therefore deserves a great grade. In most cases, the students who ignored those suggestions made by teachers admitted that if the revision requires them to do much work, they just choose to ignore it. and other times ignore the feedback because they did not understand or they just did not agree with the teachers. An equal number of students preferred indirect and direct feedback, respectively. It is worth noticing that most students who had received only one type of feedback actually prefer to have the other type of feedback. The students who had received a combination of the two types of feedback would prefer indirect feedback. Students' preference of a particular method depended upon their willingness to improve their writing skills. So mainly from the analysis of the interview, the teachers felt that they should provide more feedback than what they were doing, but were constrained by time. So most teachers would prefer oral feedback to written feedback. Additionally, most teachers felt that they needed to give more positive feedback. In the interest of time, they were aware that they gave very little, if any, positive or encouraging comments on students' paper. In conclusion, the amount of written feedback they received was unsatisfactory. The teachers felt that it was easier for them to provide oral feedback and had the impression that oral feedback was sufficient. Overall, the quality of revision did not suggest that students' writers had made extra efforts to improve their essay. Most of the revision work was based on direct correction. Some students appreciated indirect feedback, but they did not address the feedback successfully in their revision. Suggestions to students are: first, take individual responsibilities and develop a positive attitude towards revision tasks. Additionally, seeking oral or written feedback instead of ignoring feedback. Revision is not meant to satisfy the teachers. Rather, it is to keep students gain accuracy and development. Do not rely on teachers' feedback for revision and use other resources to improve their own writing. Teachers must remind them to do so. Suggestions to the teachers are: first, combine both direct and indirect feedback for language work and written comments to help with structure, ideas, and genre features as part of the course objectives. Additionally, they needed to understand that the purpose of written feedback is not only to justify the grades they've given or point students' weakness, but it should help students to become better writers. This is my reference page. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Sam, for this great presentation.
You're
Again,
very
we'll
welcome.
have our excuse me, Q&A at the end of all three of the presentations. So let's welcome our next up presentation from Daniel. You can, I think, Sam, you need to stop sharing.
Okay, right.
Thank you.
Well,
Let me share
And-
the screen.
Go ahead, what you can.
Okay, well, thank you. Can everybody see my screen? Is it working? Okay, well, thank you. In today's presentation, I want to talk a little bit about vocabulary. And basically what I want to do with this is present a very dynamic way to teach vocabulary. But before, I want to try to understand or what vocabulary is, or what does it really mean to know a word? When I'm teaching vocabulary, how can I know that my students know a word? What does it mean to know a word? Then I want to share some principles that we would like to take into account when we're trying to teach vocabulary in a second language. And finally, I'm presenting a material or a unit that I designed based on these principles and in this vocabulary teaching theory that I'm presenting today. Well, so vocabulary is not words. When we think of lexicon, we need to think about a set of words or lexical units. It's not individual words that are there. We have to think of vocabulary or lexicon as units, as different constructions or chunks. So we could define vocabulary or lexicon as the knowledge that a learner of a language has on vocabulary and the ability to make proper use of it at the oral and written level. So the most important thing now is to understand that vocabulary or lexicon is not individual words. So we need to approach this from chunks or units. Now, what does it mean to know a word? We can say, or we can feel that we know a word, or that our students know a word when they can pronounce it, when they can read it correctly, when they recognize it, when they hear it, or when they see it in written forms, or if we are having a conversation, they come to our mind if we need it, or we know how it works grammatically, we know the important meanings, and we know how to use it or when not to use it, depending on different context. So if we take these into account, we can say, yeah, I know what this word is, or I know this word. All right, so basically, learning vocabulary goes beyond a simple memorization of individual words. It's not a word itself. Vocabulary or lexicon and this process of learning and teaching is talking about units. The acquisition of vocabulary occurs through the creation of mental networks of words, associations, placements, and or combinations. When we talk about lexicon, we do not talk about words, but we talk about formulaic sequences or chunks, like speed limit or happy birthday, way to go, you're welcome, or are you kidding me? So these expressions are the ones that our students need, because those expressions are the one that we use in real life conversation. So these chunks or expressions are sequences of words that are stored and retrieved holistically in something that scholars like or have called a mental lexicon. So this is a great example. Native speakers choose socially standardized expressions such as I'll see you later, or just see you later or later, as opposed to other possible but unlikely generated constructions such as I hope that we will meet at a more protracted date, right? No, like these constructions help us bring meaning to our conversation, right? So these are not like we'll see, I and the future will, and then the verb see, and then later. We just know I'll see you later as an idea that we will meet in the future. In Spanish, 52 to 58% of linguistic production is based on chunks. Let's take a look to this example. The verb to dissolve, which in Spanish is disolver. Disolver changes a lot based on what chunk or how we are mixing the verb with. So disolver could be to dissolve or could be to break up, and it has different meanings. And the 52 or 58% of our language, or Spanish, which is my first language, is based on these chunks. In English, I could think of an example and the difference between give someone a pen and give someone a break. All right, so what are these principles? Oh, Jesus. What are the principles that I need to take into account when I'm teaching vocabulary? What do I need to take into account when I go to a classroom and I want my students to learn new chunks? First, we have to make vocabulary a priority focus of attention from the initial levels. This is a wonderful quote by Wilkins that says, while without grammar, little can be conveyed, without vocabulary, nothing can be conveyed. And that actually makes sense. If you travel to another country and you don't speak the language in that country, you don't really take the grammar book. You take a dictionary at least, because you want vocabulary to communicate. Nobody takes a grammar. So like, oh, all right, so I'm going to use subjunctive here because I'm expressing, or I need to take a look to the conjugation of the past tense. We need vocabulary to communicate, not like grammar. Second principle is to deepen the knowledge of the lexical unit. Here, the example is the word miedo. But if I teach the word miedo, do I really teach the meaning of miedo? Miedo is fear, it's a noun. What I want my students to learn if I'm teaching miedo is this. First, how miedo is pronounced correctly, miedo, all the different variation of the word, miedoso, miedica, miedito, this beautiful social linguistic approach, right? Then how different it is, odio, which is hate, and odiar, which is to hate. Miedo is a noun, but it cannot be turned into a verb, miedar. My students need to know that if odio becomes or turns into odiar, miedo is not, it is not, doesn't work the same way. Then they need to know some expressions such as me da miedo volar or me da miedo que hueles. What is the definition of miedo? Well, like the definition from the dictionary. And then we have, all the synonyms or similar ways to express this idea of fear. It's not just miedo, that means fear. That's not how I want my students to learn. They need more, they need to go deep into this knowledge of words or meaning. Then principle number 3 is to teach word blocks known as chunks, not individual words, but units. Principle 4, teach enough vocabulary in the classroom according to the student's lexical needs. If we go deep into this conversation, I can barely tell that up to level B1, students need to know at least the 2,000 more used words. And then after B2 level, C1, they need to go deep into what they really need or they want to focus on. So in order to function in a specific discourse, the characteristic of which will depend on their specific needs, the learner must know approximately the 2,000 most frequent words and expressions or chunks to level B1. And then after level B2, C1, C2, all these thematic or the important or the academic fields they want to focus on. Also, principle number 5 is to reflect on the similarities and differences between Spanish and other languages that the student uses. It's not wrong to go back to L1. Studies have proved that going back to L1 actually helps students make association, like mental associations with what they are learning in this new language. Principle number 6 is to know how to present the vocabulary in the classroom. We cannot just give them words or chunks. We need to have a route or a way to do this. And we'll see that later. Principle number 7, we need as teachers to create opportunities for incidental and intentional learning. Incidental learning is this learning in which students are listening to a song, watching a video, and they are getting the chunks unconsciously. Intentional learning, which is the one that is more likely to be used in academic fields or Spanish for specific purposes, is this intentional learning in which students are being focused on what is the meaning and all the associations of these chunks. And principle number 8 is, well, we have some factors that have been proved to help memorization of the lexicon. And we have to be careful here because when we talk about memorization, we have to take into account 2 different types of memorization, short-term and long-term. And these 3 factors help students keep these chunks in mind. First is recurrence, which is basically you don't want to overwhelm your students. Up to 10 chunks per class or unit, and by unit I mean an entire unit that could take to 1 up to 3 classes maybe. And yes, although 10 units, it's not too much, it actually helps. It's not about the quantity but quality. Then we need to use the same unit in different contexts so they can know all the different contexts that in which they can use it. And then we need to give them like a little bit of cognitive effort. Well, with this into account, what's the best way to actually design materials or a class to teach vocabulary? Here, I'm gonna rush. We have identification, which is basically the students need to know or to get a context of the word. Then we have a second step in which they have to understand or interpret the meaning, what word or what the meaning of that chunk is. And then we have 3 important steps: use, retention, and attachment. These 3 steps help students use the word, keep the word in the short-term memory, and then attachment help students keep the knowledge in a long-term memory. Finally, we want them to reuse what they already know after having this kept in their mental lexicon. This comes from Gomez Molina, 2004. And now, based on this is basically my proposal. There is a problem with textbooks in Colombia. These are the textbooks that are being used in Colombia to teach Spanish. And as you can see, there are not Colombian literature activities. There are not even literature activities. If you see out of 61 books or 21 books, there are actually just 21 activities. So literature is not really being taken into account when it comes to teach a language. So if I want to go deeper and see what Colombian literature role is there are only 2 authors out of 61 activities. So we really need to create more materials to teach, culture and literature in Colombia. So my proposal was to create something called No Comas Cuentos, Léelos. This was a didactic proposal to teach vocabulary using Colombian folk tales. And basically, I'm going to show you this very quick. If you remember, there's a process in which vocabulary must be taught. So identification, understanding, use, retention, attachment, and reuse. Then for each part, a section was designed. So section number 1 helps students identify the units. Section number 2 help them understand the meaning. Section number 3 make them use, retain, and attach the meaning. And finally, they're pushed to use that knowledge. So this is a quick walkthrough. The design of the unit. We have the 4 sections. The first section for identification of the units. Second section here, paralebolas, which basically they try to make meaning of this or try to understand what's going on. And if you can see, the same chunks are being used from the beginning. They're seeing the same structures in different contexts and different activities, so they can remember the same structures. And I told you, not more than 10 chunks, and that works in different contexts. Then we have short and long-term memory, and at the end, activities so they can use them in their own way. And some like realia, or actually this comes from a real event in Colombia, and one part for like self-evaluation. Thank you so much. I think I'm really late. Yeah, 15 minutes. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel or Daniel.
Same.
Okay, we can have 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A. If anybody wants to ask questions or make comments, please feel free to turn on your mic or use the chat function. Lily.
First of all, thank you everyone for all of your wonderful presentations. I don't actually have a question. I think I would like to have some comments towards Sam, because I think I used to be very interested in corrective feedback as well. But gradually, as a language teacher, I started to feel bad to really only focus on students' accuracy and just constantly correct their errors. But I know, for a lot of times, accuracy should be focused on, and especially for writing tasks, accuracy actually influences greatly. So I guess after listening to your presentation, I was just reflecting on my own teaching and on my own personal philosophy. So I guess if I have to ask a question, I would want to ask, what position are you taking on this continuum of, communication versus accuracy?
Yes, thank you so much for asking that. It's really a good question. And the research also shows that the practice of corrective given is related to the teaching context for sure. And this is a case study from a first year conversation course and also in EFL setting. So I would say maybe for sophomore and senior students, then the accuracy may not be that important while teachers are focusing on their meaning conveying and fluency. But in this case, first of all, it's compulsory, and it meant to be taught to every single student before they embark their academic studies. So teachers need to make sure that they have at least some level of writing accuracy. So I think my takeaway is it still depends on the teaching context and what is the course objective, and which even set a higher standard for teachers to interpret the course objectives by themselves, whether it is focusing on fluency or whether it focuses more on accuracy.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're very welcome, definitely.
We can probably have one more question.
I think we have a question in the chat.
Oh, right. Thank you for pointing that out. It's a question for Daniel. Could the same curriculum be used for grammar, perhaps an inquiry-based approach where students have to read to identify and explain the grammatical rules they see?
Interesting, and I feel that some part of this could be used. However, this approach deals more with the way in which we can mix words to bring semantic meaning to it. However, and I'm glad Professor Toth is here, I think of the PACE approach, in which students actually have to bring their own meaning to grammar constructions, and they have to self-discover what's going on in this grammatical explanation. So although I wouldn't say the same route can be used to teach grammar, it will definitely help if you mix PACE and these ideas of long or short and long-term memory. It could be interesting to mix both approaches, but I think vocabulary works with one route or route, and then grammar might work better with a different one. It could, like help each other. I mean, you can be creative and dynamic and create your own methodology mixing both, and that'll be interesting.
Well, thank you for your response to that comment. Do we have one more person, last chance for taking? So for Ruge and Haoyue, I actually wanted to ask you, I know that you are still, it's a work in process, it sounded like. Do you have any preliminary findings for your study so far that you can share with us?
Yeah, I can start, and how you feel free to jump in. Yeah, you're definitely right that it's still we're progressing our study, and we've been looking for some previous studies to show that how. I mean, we're also very curious about this question. So how can we tell that students' actions are transferred to learning? So I think it's a very important question, and it's a very important question for us to answer in the study. So I'm not sure that I have a very definite or comprehensible answer, but there do some, for example, some dynamic assessment study in SAT. They also use a dialogical evidence, and so how to prove students are learning or they develop. First of all, they compare the overall change. So it's a kind of process. So at the beginning, they kind of hesitate, and maybe the peers gave them some hints, some agreement, some conforming their conform and checking conform and asking for conform and given the confirmation. And so it's really depend on what our data can show us. So we think that these are our assumptions. So yeah, so Haoyue, what do you think?
There's if Haoyue you want to jump in, but there's a question from Sam. Can I read that question?
Yeah, definitely. it said, I'm interested in knowing what conventions of transcription is used in CA when online tests are also involved. Yeah, that's a really great question. So usually there are, in CA studies, there are several conventions used. One of them is Jefferson's 2004 transcription convention. And with the multimodal convention, studies have been employed Mondada's multimodal physical and the body gestures and their embodied actions. So I think it would be great for us to also adopt these two transcript conventions. And so it do add more complexity because it's like a band-aid. Maybe there are, because in a virtual group, in an online group, there are test messages, and in their interaction process, we said that we want them in and real-time audio recording at least. So if so, it won't influence a lot. So hopefully it won't influence a lot, but I think we think that it's quite interesting to see the complexity. So yeah, we will think about it carefully. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Thank you so much.
Okay, Sam, do you have anything you want to respond? Or are you good? Okay. All right, so thank you, everyone. We are a minute away from 6, and thank you again for staying with me for the last minute. And I'm just so delighted to kind of invite you to our next and our last activity for this day is our happy hour. You can access the happy hour. Use the you click the exhibitor on the left side of the web page. It starts at 6:15. We'll mainly just chat and have fun games. I assure you, it's the best part, if not the best part of the day today. So please come. We hope to see you there as well.
Thank you. And please join us at the closing remarks too. Sarah is going to close out the conference.